Starting off this countdown, we have the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. This disaster is said to be the most serious nuclear accident in US history. It took place at the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania. At 4 a.m. on March 28, 1979, a number of equipment failures took place. A pressure valve in one of the reactors failed to close, so the cooling water contaminated with radiation was draining into other buildings. And then the control operators didn't know how to deal with this. And soon the reactor heated to over 4,000 degrees, and radioactive steam seeped out of the building. Although no deaths or injuries were reported, it's believed that this leak caused a number of cancers and infant deaths in the area. Of course, the company downplayed the event. They were like, oh, nothing really happened here, no radiation leaked out. But that's not the case. In the end, only pregnant women and small children were told to evacuate the area, but those that stayed suffered the consequences.
In our number 9 spot today, we have animal mutations. There's no doubt that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster had devastating effects on all of the life in the area surrounding this meltdown. I think that's something most of us can agree on, and while most of the human life has moved out of the area, there is a lot of wildlife that remains, and those animals have taken over the exclusion zone. While scientists often observe and test these animals, it is clear that they are all contaminated in radiation and thus have mutated in certain ways, but despite the rumors, there are in fact no 3-headed cows wandering around. I think this might be one of the most popular legends floating around in terms of the Chernobyl disaster, the story that there are just full-on monsters living within the exclusion zone, or that the meltdown happened because of a failed radiation experiment on these animals. There are tons of swirling rumors regarding the animals, but in the end the effects of the radiation is seen much more in things like their ability to reproduce, or them not being fit for consumption, rather than in things like extra limbs and heads and eyes. In our number 8 spot today, we have the government cover-up Part 1. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around, and we've got a few of them to talk about today, so let's start off now with the first one. This little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in shortwave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and they would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what this structure was or what the sound was. This led people to think that the signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So this story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but I do suppose that this is a list of urban legends. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Chernobyl zombies. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it is certainly not based on any real life facts, at least that we all know of. This little legend claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happens if those who did then became the undead? Yep, we're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm or deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm just gonna go ahead and call this one out for being fake. I mean, at least I'm really hoping it is. We've dealt with enough in the last year and a half. We really don't need to add radiation zombies onto the list. In our number 6 spot today, we have It Never Happened. Okay, this is probably the easiest one to disprove, but perhaps it's not. This legend suggests that the whole disaster never actually happened and that the entire thing is just conspiracy. I don't know why anyone would do that, But hey, this is just a legend after all. There would be so many hoops to have to jump through in order to pull off that level of a stunt and keep it up for this long. Like, let's be honest, there are too many people involved for all of them to have been able to all keep the secret for this long. There's just no way everyone could keep their mouths shut. And what about the people who passed away from the event? I just have a lot of questions about this one. There's some weird legends on this list, but I do have to say that this one might be the least believable. And we just talked about zombies. Unfortunately, it seems as though the Chernobyl nuclear disaster was a very real thing that happened, and it affected a ton of people. It was certainly an event that changed the world and made us all a lot smarter when it comes to nuclear safety. I hope. In our number 5 spot today, we have this super secret laboratory. This legend suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was a planned event that took place for a specific reason. You may be wondering what this apparent plan is, and that would be the plan to build a super secret laboratory. I mean, think about it. You want to build a super secret place, just cause the entire place to be so terribly contaminated in radiation that no one will want to search the area. Or those who do might even meet an untimely fate. It certainly is an evil plan, but it could potentially be quite effective. I don't think that this is the case at all, and I don't think Chernobyl was a planned event in order to build a secret lab, but I do agree that whoever originated this legend has quite an imagination. What do you think this lab would contain if this were true? Like an Area 51 type thing? Aliens and mermaids? Or perhaps that's where they're hiding all the three-eyed animals everyone keeps talking about? In our number 4 spot today, we have the Chernobyl illness. This is one of the more malicious stories on this list, which I do not like at all. People who lived in the region of the disaster had a huge impact on their day-to-day lives, and a lot of people had long-lasting health impacts from the entire thing. This disaster has been linked to terrible things like an increase in thyroid cancer as well as other forms of cancer. So when fake stories of a fake disease began circulating around, it was honestly super messed up. One of these fake illnesses coincided with the height of panic, misinformation, and ignorance surrounding HIV, and thus the totally made-up condition of Chernobyl HIV was born. This made-up disease was the source of many a whispered warning against friendship or relationships with those who had survived the disaster. Like, these people just survived the worst nuclear accident in history and now they have to worry about harmful schoolyard gossip? Yeah, no thanks. Despite its terrible origins, people still spread rumors and fear-mongered, and it truly is a cruel, entirely made-up story. In our number 3 spot today, we have Government Cover-Up Part 2. After the release of the incredible HBO show Chernobyl, which you haven't seen it, it is a must-watch. Like, it is such a good show. I watched it with Che, if you remember that guy, and it was just unreal. Anyway, after the show's release, the Russian government released a statement saying that the show was actually anti-Soviet Union propaganda and that they would be releasing their own Chernobyl show, which would detail how the CIA was actually the cause for the disaster. Rumor has it that the CIA sabotaged something which caused the reactor to melt down, and the whole thing was actually America's fault. I have no way of either proving or disproving this theory or legend, but I think it's probably safe to say that someone here isn't telling the truth. And it's not like it's a new thing that Russia and the US aren't exactly getting along. Maybe it's all just propaganda, or maybe there's some truth? I don't know, what do you guys think? In our number 2 spot today, we have the BLACKBIRd. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the BLACKBIRd for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The BLACKBIRd is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plants on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from unfortunately were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the BLACKBIRd really is out there or not. The BLACKBIRd is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. In our number 1 spot today, we have alien cleanup. There's always gotta be an alien story to keep things interesting and to add to the list of questions we have for extraterrestrials when we hopefully eventually find them, and Chernobyl is no different. Rather than the aliens causing the disaster, which might be where your mind went, instead this legend suggests that they helped in the aftermath. Apparently some people out there think that the Chernobyl disaster wasn't as bad as it should have been. I don't think they mean it in as bad of a way as that sounds, but rather they are just surprised that the amount of people who passed away in the disaster wasn't higher, considering how bad the whole ordeal actually was. This, coupled with an apparent eyewitness account from a man named Mikhail Veritsky, who claimed he saw a fiery ball of light hovering for a few minutes above the exposed reactor on the night of the incident, has led people to speculate that maybe our friendly alien neighbors swooped down in the nick of time to help clean up the mess that was made. Apparently this ball of light was also seen on September 16, 1989, when there was more radiation leaking from the unit at Chernobyl, which some claim was the aliens containing the radiation. Honestly, I'd like to think that this one is true, because what a nice thing for the aliens to do. They probably have their own nuclear weapons, so they certainly didn't need ours, and we didn't really have the tools to clean it up, so I can definitely appreciate the fact that they lended a helping hand.
Starting us off at number 10 are Dewey's old favorite, dolls. Remember this one? Yeah, so in case you missed a few of our other Chernobyl videos, there are large piles of creepy, most likely possessed, burned up, radioactive dolls everywhere. Where are they coming from? Well, odds are most of these are actually coming from tourists and people looking to grab that one spooky and scary pic for the gram, but no one knows how this all came to be. It's hard to know if this started from actual dolls that witnessed the explosion, or if someone just had the bright idea one day to start adding messed up dolls all over the exclusion zone. In the end, we will never know, because unless you are a regular there at the exclusion zone, it's hard to distinguish which dolls have been there since day one and which ones are new additions. Either way, I hate all of it.
Moving on to number 9, we have the Taylor energy spill. If you guys are liking this video so far, then smash that like button for me, the Christmas cowgirl. Maybe you've heard of this, but chances are you haven't, because this oil spill was kept pretty hush-hush. Hardly anyone outside of Louisiana knew what went down. That's because they wanted to keep it all a secret in order to protect the company's reputation. Basically, back in 2004, an oil production platform sank in a mudslide after Hurricane Ivan struck. It said that 300 to 700 barrels of oil per day spewed from this site. This has been going on for more than 14 years. The spill was hidden for 6 of these years before an environmental group stumbled upon it and was like, what's going on here? Why is there oil seeping here? This is close to being one of the worst oil spills in US history. Like, millions of barrels have leaked into the Gulf of Mexico, polluting the waters. To be more precise, they estimated that the spill leaked 140 million gallons of oil, which is insane. In our 8th spot, we have Sellafield, UK. Back in the day during the Cold War, Sellafield was the site where weapon-grade nuclear material was produced for the UK's nuclear weapon program. However, in 1957, one of the Windscale piles caught on fire, and 11 tons of uranium was on fire for 3 days. As a result, radioactive material started spreading across the Lake District. It was deemed Britain's worst nuclear accident. On top of that, no one was evacuated and no one received iodine pills. Why? Well, workers were told to keep it all under wraps and to just keep working like nothing happened. Things continued on until they found out that like golf courses, milk, and chickens, among other things, were getting contaminated. That's when they were forced to tell the public about this. To this day, this place is considered one of the most radioactive places in the world. In our 7th spot, we have the Halifax explosion. This is said to be the deadliest industrial disaster in Canada. It occurred on December 6, 1917, when a cargo ship filled with war explosives collided with another ship in the Halifax harbor. The collision caused a massive explosion. 2,000 innocent people lost their lives. 9,000 were injured by the explosion and the flying debris and collapsing buildings. Others were killed by fires that scorched the area from the explosion. explosion. On top of that, a plume of black, thick smoke filled and polluted the air. Moving on to number 6, we have the reactive zone of Paris. During the 1920s to 1930s, a number of radioactive tests were done in this area. The test involved salts of radium-226. They were carried out safely until the French army decided to take over, and they ended up seriously contaminating the area, and they never disposed of the radioactive waste properly. In the 1990s, 61 barrels of cesium-137 and radium-226 were found stored there. On top of that, there was 160,000 gallons of contaminated soil. Over the years, the area has been decontaminated, or at least they tried to. It never really worked. And in 2006, more contaminated areas were found. The whole time, the area was so radioactive and the French army tried to keep it all a secret, but the people living nearby suffered. A high percentage of people living in the surrounding areas were found to have cancer. Although they denied that this site had anything to do with it, it seems quite obvious that it does. To this day, this place is considered the most radioactive zone on the planet. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the contaminated hospital. Back in September of 1987, 2 individuals broke into an abandoned hospital in Brazil. They then were going around taking some things, hoping that they could resell it and get some money. Some things that they stole were parts from a teletherapy unit. Little did they know that what they took home was highly radioactive. That night, the 2 men fell ill and began throwing up. Over the course of the next couple of days, things got worse. In fact, one of the men had his hand swell and he had to get it partially amputated. But they didn't know what was making them sick. Plus, they didn't really want to tell people like, oh hey, we broke into a hospital and stole some stuff, so they kept it all a secret. And then one of the guys actually dismantled this radioactive object and was like, oh, what do we have in here? He ended up spreading cesium over a large area. As a result, 4 people died and 250 others were injured from exposure to the radioactive materials. A total of 112,000 people were exposed to the radioactive material. On top of that, the men's homes were demolished because they were so contaminated, and a number of other areas had to be decontaminated. To this day, this is said to be one of the world's worst nuclear disasters and one of the world's worst radiological incidents. In our 4th spot, we have the EXXON VALDEZ oil spill. On March 24th, 1989, one of the worst man-made disasters in US history took place. So on this day, an oil tanker owned by EXXON Shipping Company spilled 11 million gallons of crude oil into Prince William Sound. So just after midnight that day, the ship hit a reef. The collision caused the ship's hull to tear open and all that oil spilled into the water. Turns out that the captain of EXXON VALDEZ was drinking at the time of this event, and also was not qualified to steer such a massive ship. This spill impacted 13,000 miles of coastline. It killed hundreds of thousands of birds, otters, seals, whales, you name it. Even to this day, this area is still heavily polluted. And to think it could have been easily avoided had they had a different captain of the ship. And most like the other disasters on this list, the company tried to keep it all hush-hush, but in the end, the truth revealed itself. Coming in at number 3, we have the North Korea nuclear accident. North Korea is a very secretive country. It's hard to know what really goes on there. What we do know though is that North Korea is openly creating nukes and missiles and experimenting with these nuclear weapons. According to a number of articles, one of these tests in 2017 didn't go so well. 200 nuclear workers were killed at Kim Jong-un's testing facility. Basically, they're doing so much nuclear testing that the ground just can't take it anymore. I mean, in 2018, a mountain collapsed after more nuclear testing. But anyways, in this case, an unfinished tunnel collapsed, killing 100 workers. Then 100 more workers died after trying to rescue the first group. Now, this disaster is nowhere near as bad as Chernobyl, but I put this on this list because experts are scared and have predicted that in the future, the nuclear testing facility will most likely crumble. And when it does, a radioactive leak will occur, and it's said to be even worse than Chernobyl. So they're on the path to a very bad nuclear explosion or leak. In our second spot, we have the BHOPAL disaster, also referred to as the Bhopal gas tragedy. This was a gas leak that occurred on the night of December 2nd to the morning of December 3rd in 1984. It occurred at the Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal, India. Apparently, the pipes were lacking routine maintenance, and that caused a backflow of water into a tank containing methyl isocyanate gas. That's what caused this gas leak. This is said to be one of the world's worst industrial disasters. Over 500,000 people were exposed to this gas. It seeped into the towns surrounding the plant. It said that the death toll was 2,259, but later it was revealed to be much higher, with 3,787 deaths. Some even believe it was up to 8,000 deaths, but the government is concealing the true number of deaths from this tragedy. On top of that, over 500,000 people were left injured, including nearly 4,000 permanent injuries. And in our number one spot today, we have the KYSHTYM disaster. On September 29, 1957, an explosion occurred at a plutonium production site for nuclear weapons and nuclear fuel reprocessing plant in Russia. It was built during the late 1940s as part of a Soviet program to develop nuclear weapons. It was a secret facility that people did not know about. Well, on that day, the cooling system containing radioactive waste failed and no one even noticed. The waste started to heat up and eventually exploded at 350 degrees Celsius. 20 million curies of radioactive material flung into the sky. It got picked up by the wind and spread over an area of 20,000 square kilometers. 270,000 people were living in the affected areas. And what's worse is that the Soviet government refused to let people know what happened. No one evacuated, and hundreds of people died from the radioactivity of the area. Hundreds of others suffered from radiation sickness. It wasn't until 1989 did the Soviet government acknowledge what happened. At least in Chernobyl, people were told what went down and then were forced to evacuate.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not wanting to visit the site. But with the technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds, but with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sighting of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. Many people have reported seeing shadowy figures and sometimes even faces in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe that these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things that we have on today's list?
At number 9, we have missing silver filters. Remember those pile of creepy dolls? Yeah, of course you do, it literally just freaking happened. Well, in addition to the piles of dead dolls, there are also piles of old gas masks everywhere, especially in one old school classroom. Some cheeky and hilarious, sick person even put some of these masks on dolls. Isn't that great? Anyway, what is mysterious about these gas masks is that these filters inside of all of them have been removed, and these filters contain just a small amount of silver in them, and what is most likely what happened is that looters came and took all of them. But what was done with the silver? No one really knows. If looters did indeed steal them, then I'm guessing that somewhere out there some people have radioactive jewelry or even silverware, because they most likely sold it. It's hard to say, but if any of you watching have your own Geiger meters at home right now, I would check it out on anything silver in your home, because you might just have a Chernobyl souvenir without even knowing it. At number 8, we have survivor immortality. While this one doesn't take place in Chernobyl exactly, it stems from Chernobyl. One Russian scientist who survived the explosion back in 1986 and 6 other Russian scientists have recently relocated to the small Greek island of Gavdos. There is some conspiracy though, because some believe that these scientists actually relocated to the island to become immortal. Gavdos has 50 residents in total on the island, and it is believed to have mythical healing powers that make its residents immortal. Reporters from Vice interviewed a filmmaker who was making a documentary on the island and found out that the scientists work on various inventions from inside the local compound. They also have 7 acres of land that was given to them by a priest. Some think these Russian scientists are spies, while others believe they moved out there to not only become immortal themselves, but also clear them of all the radiation using the mystical powers of the island. They are apparently also building a temple named the Temple of Apollo. I think these guys were a little too close to the blast, if you know what I mean. At number 7, we have the random examination chair. Out in the middle of a wooded area in the exclusion zone is a random gynecologist's chair. How the hell did it get there? No one freaking knows. It can only be assumed that this chair was picked up by some local pranksters who went through the trouble of picking up this radioactive artifact and brought it to a random spot in the woods. But that is so much freaking work. I mean, guys, why? Aside from that, every other possibility is straight up terrifying. Maybe the blast blasted the chair out in the forest, but if it did, then why was there one of these chairs so close to a freaking radioactive reactor? See, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's just another unproven, less than appealing sight that can be found in the exclusion zone. At number 6, we have silhouettes. You may remember this one from one of my other Chernobyl videos too. The mystery here is we have no idea if these silhouettes are actually based on real people or if it's just a morbid art piece done by another Chernobyl creepy artist. New silhouettes show up all of the time, all over the town of Pripyat, and the only other mystery here is who is behind it. Is it one talented artist, or is it a group that has decided to take turns so no one ever gets the true answer? No matter what, these things sure do add to the creep factor of this ghost town, and I'm sure it's also a terrifying sight to see at night. Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have a Chernobyl cover-up. In a documentary titled The Russian Woodpecker, Fyodor Alexandrovich explains a conspiracy theory that the Chernobyl blast was actually orchestrated to cover up the failure of the Russian woodpecker. Now, it wasn't a Russian bird or the Russian version of Woody the Woodpecker. The Russian woodpecker was actually an array radar that was meant to detect missiles before they were launched. The device was named after its woodpecker-like sound it would make during its operation. It cost 7 billion rubles and unfortunately did not work. It is suspected that it didn't work because of the northern lights messing with its signals, but it can't be for certain. So instead of suffering this terrible embarrassment, the Chernobyl plant that was known for its instability blew up, distracting everyone from the failure of the woodpecker. It's hard to say how likely all of this is, but when shooting the woodpecker documentary, apparently some pretty weird stuff happened to the documentary crew, such as visits from secret police services, as well as even one crew member being shot by a hidden sniper during the Euromaidan protests. Whatever the truth is here, it sounds like they were putting their nose where it wasn't wanted. At number 4, we have no containment building. Back in 1986, when the Chernobyl explosion actually happened, there was quite mysteriously no containment building that surrounded the reactors. Usually there are containment structures around radioactive places like the reactors located in Chernobyl. They are gas-tight structures that are usually made of steel reinforced concrete, so it can confine fission products that could release into the atmosphere during an accident if one were to happen. Sure enough, we all know that one happened here, and interestingly enough, it was not prepared for an accident that dangerous. According to author Richard Mueller of the book Physics for Future Presidents, The Science Behind the Headlines, if there would have been a containment unit around the reactors, Mueller believes that there would have been virtually no deaths. Interesting. I wonder if this coincides with any of the conspiracy of the Russian woodpecker as mentioned before. Maybe. Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have alien saviors. In this case they quite literally came in peace. An eyewitness by the name of Mikhail Varitsky claimed to have seen a large fireball of light hovering above the reactor on the night of the explosion. Later on September 16th in 1989, apparently there was another huge radiation leak, and it is reported that this same ball of light was seen in the exact same spot once again. Many believe it to be aliens that were actually protecting us from the radioactive blast. Some claim that the blast was nowhere near as big as what it could have been, and that these aliens actually helped absorb and clean up whatever extra radiation that they could to save us. You know me, I'm all about the alien theories, but I'm not sure about this one. I will say, many say similar events happened during the Fukushima accident as well. Oh well, aliens, if you are listening to me right now and you did help us, thank you. Now, show yourself. At number 2, we had the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In April of 1986, right before the explosion in July, many reported seeing a large creature that looked like a blackbird flying around Chernobyl. This creature was large with red glowing eyes and was compared to America's legend, the Mothman. Why? What's so similar between a large Mothman and a large blackbird? Well, both of these creatures had large glowing red eyes, as well as both showed up right before major events. The Mothman appeared and was spotted right before the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967, which reportedly killed 46 people. Some survivors of the Chernobyl blast reported seeing this giant scary creature fly away from the reactor after the blast. Many believe that this bird was a paranormal entity that was a harbinger of terrible things to come. Others believe it was just a large stork. I don't know what to believe here, but the idea of a giant paranormal creature that is similar to the one that was seen in the US 20 years before gives me goosebumps in the best way possible. I love monster and ghost lore, which is what brings us to our number 1 spot. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have my favorite, ghosts. That's right, not just named a ghost town because it's abandoned, but also because there are many different spirits that are said to be found here. Andrei Karsukov, a nuclear physicist from New York, told one story after his visit to the area back in 1997. Karsukov reports that he went to the power station one day at 7:30 a.m. and visited the number 4 reactor in the sarcophagus. You know, the big containment unit structure that they should have had on there before the explosion? Yeah, that thing. Well, he could not go inside due to the high levels of radiation, but once he was down there, he could hear screams coming from the inside due to a fire. So what did he do? He ran upstairs to the control room to get help, and once he barged open the door, he was told that he was the first person to open that door in 3 years. He was also told that the only way in was where he was, and if someone came in after him, they would have tripped the alarm. So it was impossible for anyone else to be down there except him. There was also a floodlight that turned on and off at very strange moments, leading the crew to believe someone or something was in the building with them.